Okay, welcome to another edition of Making a Brand. This is our product development installation. My guest host today, filling in for Tony Shellman, who's currently on the tables in Vegas, is the fashion icon and OG, Mr. Peter Paul. We are thrilled today to be joined by another fashion OG. Like many of us, his origin story begins in the early days of streetwear when there were like less than 10 credible brands, relevant brands, I should say. Dao-Yi cut his chops and paid his dues early with brands such as Mecca. Shout out to Mecca, of course. Echo, later becoming creative director at Sean John. Dao-Yi also served as the global creative director for Sergio Tacchini, another favorite brand of mine. Also was the artistic director at Donna Karan. Along with his partner Maxwell, he founded the legendary streetwear brand Public School. Their work at Public School earned them the illustrious CFDA Schwarzschild Award. Did I pronounce that right? Schwarzschild? Swarovski Award
I have trouble with it
for menswear. They also won the CFDA Vogue Fashion Fund. They also won the CFDA Menswear Award in 2014, the International Woolmark Award, and also the CFDA Lexus Fashion Initiative in 2019. Maybe a Source Award up in there somewhere as well. But
I wish.
we are thrilled to have you here with us, my brother.
Thank you.
A legend in this business. And now that we've ran down the impressive bio, just if you could tell us in your words, who is Dao-Yi Chow?
Well, thank you guys for having me here. I certainly consider you guys, my older brothers, not that much older, but so I appreciate you having me here. I get asked this question a lot about like how would I define who I am, and I really feel like my place, on this planet has been really as a family man first before anything. I have two beautiful sons and a beautiful wife, and I think before anything that I do outside of the home, I think my proudest and most important role is as a father and as a husband, a son, a brother, an uncle. So my family means a lot to me, and that really informs a lot of the decisions that I make on a daily basis, not only just in my career, but what I hope to kind of leave behind as a legacy, or when people remember me, hopefully they remember me as a family first man. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, I remember Dow, man, early days, man. What I really loved about you, man, was like it was similar to like my coming ups. I mean, I knew you to be involved in hip hop, but I remember seeing you on the runway, and you were like super confident back then, and I was like, oh, cool. It's, you kind of started similar to me, where I went from dance to runway, so it was hip hop background on the runway, and then you got involved in fashion, man.
Yeah.
I mean, what was that leap between? I know the leap for me was I intentionally, strategically said I wanted to get next to designers.
Yeah.
Didn't really want to be a model per se. I wanted to be a rapper.
Yeah.
But I was like, the fastest, quickest way to get into fashion, probably get next to these actual designers.
Right. Actually, I mean, probably like a lot of people is really centered around music. I think coming up, it was less fashion focused and more wanting to be around the music. And I think the music is really what, when I say music, I mean hip hop, that was really driving the culture, back when we were coming up, right? It wasn't necessarily fashion, that the music was really the heartbeat of it all. And so I knew I always wanted to be around the music. Thought I would be some way, somehow, while I was still in school, DJing and making our little beats here and there, like some way, somehow figure a way into the music industry. And so fashion was really never a thought, at the time. Hip hop's relationship to fashion was pretty ancillary in the sense that there wasn't anything that was necessarily built or started from that community. Certainly, don't get me wrong, of course, the Carl Kanais and the April Walkers and the 555 Souls, those things were sort of still budding and coming of age. But I think everyone my age just wanted to be close to the music. So it really started through music. And that was, my introduction into fashion was always, through music. So
did somebody like handpick? How'd you get on the runway though? I mean, you was on some real runways. It wasn't like, you popped up in a lot of places, man.
Well, at the time I was still at school at NYU, and I was managing a shop called Footwork, which was Bobito Garcia's seminal shop that sold sneakers and records and mixtapes and clothes. Right. A harbinger of the shops that you see nowadays, right? It was pulling from all, like sneaker culture and music and fashion and all these things. So that was his shop, which was on 9th Street in the East Village, was like the epicenter. Like anyone that was into music or having anything to do with that space would meet there. Sort of like Fat Beats. It was actually in the first Fat Beats location. Oh, nice. So at the time we were selling a brand called Echo in the shop, which was still small, and and then I got cast for one of their first shows, right. And then that was sort of my entry point into fashion, I guess. Yeah.
And speaking of paying your dues, mm-hmm. Can you talk about some of your early experiences in the fashion business, and can you also just touch on how important it is to pay those dues?
Sure. I just had this conversation with a team member of mine, a young woman who's 24 years old, who's sort of like coming up, a designer, and she was, sort of asking me what I was doing at her age, and it took me back because at the time the industry was so small and it was so, it was coming of age, and there were really no sort of rules or maybe people who had done it for a while to lay a blueprint or to to give you advice in that sense. So a lot of the paying dues was sort of just trying to figure out navigate the journey through your peers, through your friends, through basically what was right in front of you, right? Yeah. And so there wasn't it didn't necessarily feel like paying dues, I guess, I never would look back and be like, man,
we're going to juniors.
Right. Had to go get, this person coffee or there wasn't really a lot of that. It was more just trying to learn, just trying to keep up. You know what I'm saying? Like if you're playing ball or you just don't want to, and you're playing with some really, really good people, you're not gonna take a lot of chances. You're just gonna keep up. You're gonna try to keep with the flow. You're gonna play hard defense, and so it was a lot of that. And then so when I think about the paying dues, it was really just making sure, I kept my my head down and my profile low, and learned as much as I could without intruding or stepping on anyone's toes, or making a huge mistake, or any of those things. So that's how I think about the paying dues piece.
Okay. So when we were coming up in this business, we were pretty much our own target audience.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of got ideas from each other.
Yeah.
Tony would literally call me from Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
It's the last minute. What are we making? But it was easy to answer that question because we were pretty much designing for ourselves.
Right.
So how was that process for you? Where did you draw inspiration, and how did that inform your creative process?
Early on, you mean?
Throughout
The journey? I mean, I think, as a creative and as a designer, I think ultimately a little part of it, or a big part for me, was designing for myself always, and I know as we get older and as the consumer base gets younger, the idea of designing for yourself maybe not always the best idea.
Yeah.
But early on, it was always about, would I wear that, or how would I wear that, or would my friends wear this, or would we do these things, that. That's the filter, right? Like through yourself. So, fortunate enough to have grown up and be from New York City, which is the ultimate petri dish, right? Like you see everything that's happening in real time, and you're around the people who are creating culture, and so to be fortunate enough to be in those positions, you have a very high standard. You have a lot of reference points, beyond yourself. So you're constantly learning, you're constantly absorbing and taking from everything that's around you. And so in my head, it was always like, if I don't wear it, who's gonna wear it,
Yeah.
right? So it was very much always about running it through my own filter first before anything else.
No, I can agree with that. I mean, I think we had spoke earlier about this. Meeting Tommy, luckily I had already been that guy, and I had put it together in such a different way based on the clubs we hitting, seeing the low lives, differentiating, seeing what, my style versus their style, and that was the other thing, was you always had to come out on the block fly. Like in our era, it was like if you came out with, a shitty pair of Converse, dusty old, you get snapped on in 2 seconds.
Right.
So it was, you were almost pressured into making sure that, you stood out.
Sure.
And you represented.
Yeah. I mean, and you were in the places that, like everything was happening, right? Like
it mattered most.
Right.
Like
exactly.
if you were going to look fly, it was, Land Quarters, Union Square.
Right. Essentially the club, right? Like
right?
That's sort of the ultimate. Like if you could, like pass the test there, then you didn't really have to worry about everything else. Was like,
Right.
was cake. So I think being a dancer and being like in the club probably afforded you a lot of room to be able to say, hey, if I could do it here, if I could show out here, then I'm straight anywhere. And so and that's how I felt about just being in New York, whether it was at the club or wherever it was at. So yeah, I mean,
and you were very confident with yours. Whenever I saw you, I didn't feel like it was like, you felt like you were one of us in a sense. Right. Whenever you came off the block, while I saw you out, you were very confident with yours. And
I did a good job of hiding the of hiding the nervousness and the insecurity. But thank you.
So we Peter Paul and I spoke earlier about the inception of a brand or a collection, and how looking at it from marketing perspective, which is how I always looked at it, or the branding perspective. Peter Paul also looking at it from the branding and sales perspective.
Right.
But in terms of product development, what would you say should be a part of every brand's DNA at inception?
I mean, I think the most important thing is, like, if you are, you know, coming into a space, fashion industry, and you are starting your own brand, you gotta, from a design perspective or a PD perspective, like, you gotta love product, right? Simple as that. You gotta love the thing that you're getting into, and if you don't, I think it's really evident for people from the outside looking in to see that, right? And so I was always lucky because I loved product. I loved clothes. I loved sneakers. I love accessories. I love putting those things together. So it never felt like a chore, or it never felt like, you know, I had to learn it. It was something that I was like seeking out all the time because it was fulfilling, right? Like, it was a fulfilling activity to get dressed, or to see how other people dress, to see how other people put together the same, you know, because back in the day, you mentioned this, Peter, it was like that, or Chaka, you said there weren't a ton of options, right?
Yeah.
Like you have today. There really were very, you know, it was the same sort of box of tools that everyone was playing with, right? And so, one, you had to be aware of what those tools were, and then two, how do you put it together, right? And that was probably the most interesting thing, to see how people were putting Tommy together, or Low together, or
and it was an expression. I mean, think about it, man. Within our community, it was, we want to express our love for being involved with the community of hip hop. And then within that toolbox that you mentioned, and then it was up to you to take that and bring what your style was going to be to the front.
for sure,
You know, coming off the block, you were like, oh, you stood out.
right? And that's the spirit of hip hop. It's like taking things that necessarily don't belong to you, or weren't meant for you, and reappropriating that to make it our own. And that was, I think, the spirit that always drew me to it, was like, you know, Ralph Lauren, not for you. Tommy, maybe a different story, but, you know, like all these different brands, like, not for you to do this and that. But it was like, exactly.
And, Adidas and
everything, essentially, right? Like, not for you to, this isn't for you. Oh, okay, cool. It's not for me. All right, bet. I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna make it my own, right? And so, I think that spirit also really stood out to me. Was like, how do you defy the rules that certain people have for you, right? To try and put you in a place, and then you take that, you make it your own, and you actually make it better than the original intent. And so that's the spirit of hip hop that lives throughout music and all the other elements, and then that is transferred over to fashion.
So quick question. When did you, based on the brands that, you know, you obviously brought your eye to and your talent, and from the marketing perspective, you know, obviously Sean John, the Satin the Third, Mecca to Sean John, and, you know, obviously Sean John was a big platform, right, to be a part of, a big brand to be associated with. How did you take, or give what you gave to them, and then take that and apply that to public school? And when did you realize that, like, you were like, all right, I saw what I did here, but now I think I could do this?
Yeah, great question. Very clear answer. The idea of aspiration, you know, like, I think Puff really represented that better than anyone, right? And we talk about the spirit of like, cool, you're gonna put me in a box, I'm going to, you know, like, not only break out of the box, but I'm gonna take it where you never thought I could take it. Right. And I think Puff was the personification of aspiration, of like achieving things that no one ever thought anyone could do, you know, let alone a black man in this space. So that was really the spirit that I picked up on, that drove public school, because public school really wasn't necessarily a streetwear brand. Like, it was born from the music and was born from, you know, the culture. But we had bigger aspirations that, like, we didn't want to only just do t-shirts or only just do hoodies or, you know, like the sort of like iconic silhouettes that you think about when you think about streetwear. We wanted to do, you know, like the stuff that the European and the Japanese labels were doing. Like, we wanted to be able to create that from our vantage point, and that was born from our time, you know, at John John and running around with Puff and seeing the world and being in spaces that they didn't want us to be in.
But the wave that you did go on, I gotta admit, I remember the first time seeing you at Project, and I remember the booth was probably this big, right? But the clothing was luxe. It was that next level. And I remember you had two tiers. It was like public school, and you had the other brand,
right. Black Apple.
Black Apple. And you were like, all right, we got that covered, but yo, look at this. This is the next wave.
Yeah.
And yo, Chaka, I actually really, I mean, if you want to birth luxe in streetwear, even though he got boxed into it, but you kind of were like the first to come out on that. I mean, there was a few other here. You know, Chicago was trying to play their role, right? You know, I give them props. But you, from a New York perspective, you guys were one of the first to say, you know, this is what we can do with it.
Yeah, it was that streetwear DNA. Yeah, and I think because your roots were in our world, like you're not going to escape it. So you kind of
by default, right?
Yeah, so you kind of inherited that label, which in some cases benefited because you weren't necessarily saying I want to do streetwear. You were just kind of designing what you felt. Right,
exactly. We just wanted to do what we thought wasn't, you know, like, again, it was for us. It wasn't in a mix. Like, what we wanted to wear wasn't available, you know, in the marketplace. And so we went out and designed it. Like, it was a little bit of, you know, a lot of the things that we were doing at Arrive, the shop that we had in Miami, it was Margiela, but Supreme. It was, you know, Comb, but and BBC. You know, like, it was the confluence of those two worlds together, right? Like, the spirit of it was born from hip hop, but like, in terms of like fabrication and fit and silhouette and all those things, we were looking at, you know, Ray and Yoji and Margiela and all these brands. And so it was the confluence of those two things, but our spirit and where we're from, you know, it's like hearing, you know, everything for me is a hip hop metaphor, right? Like, I can't escape when we talk about it. I remember when Outkast did the Love Below, the Diamond album and Speaker Box, right? And people were like, oh, well, it's, you know, it's like Love Below is not really a hip hop, you know, and they won the, you know, best album of the year. And you know, it's like a fusion album. It's like, you know, like, not really hip hop. And Dre was like, it is hip hop, you know, because I did it, right? Like, So I couldn't, not that I'm boxed into to just being defined by hip hop, but by the sheer fact that, you know, like, I was born from this. Like, anything I create is going to be, you know, have those roots. Right. And so I felt like that for us as well.
Now, it was a good cross pollination of, you know, different things rooted in different things. But again, like hip hop, we combine them and we turn into this. We flip it, turn into this next level. Exactly. Same with that album. That evolved music. I mean, you wouldn't, if you didn't get that, you might not get Kanye. Right. You know, so the sometimes we fight it, but the evolution is going to be what it is. Yep. And thank God you did what you did, because a lot of brands evolved from what you did. Yeah. In that sense. Here's a question I was asked in one of the segments. I'd like to get your opinion. How has technology helped or has hurt streetwear industry or yourself?
I think for the most part it's helped brands and designers get off the ground that may not have been able to do that 10 years prior or 15 years prior, 20 years prior. You know, like when I think of technology, I automatically just go to social media, right? Like the idea of social media. And that's less maybe on the design and development side, but more on the, you know, the brand awareness and the marketing side of things. I think certainly the evolution of what a brand means or what a designer means to come in, to break into the space is, you know, would be 100% different if, you know, if social media didn't exist, or, you know, technology hasn't evolved in the way that it is. And I don't know if it's hurt, but I certainly, maybe you don't get the same sort of discovery or research that you would have had before that. Like, I feel like everyone has that, everyone has access to the same information, which levels the playing ground and certainly makes it, you know, fair. But I think when we were coming up, you know, it was about traveling and seeing things for yourself, right? To then bring back and think about how you could flip it. And in a lot of ways, we were really privileged to be able to travel the world and see the world. And some great designers may not have had that opportunity, you know what I'm saying, or the luxury to be able to travel and to do all those things. And so, to me, it's neither good or bad. I think it's just changed, right? It's just changed the way that we access things. But I do feel like now more than ever, you know, like a certain few POV points of view are really dominant, and they drive popular culture, which then trickles down to the creative process. And that maybe I lament on a little bit, that back in the day, for us, it was way more siloed, right? In a way. And so you could pull inspiration from all different places that wouldn't cross over from someone else. But nowadays, it just seems like everyone is looking to a few points of view that
well, I think
drive
that
everything.
It may have allowed, you know, like the truly creative people to differentiate themselves, because, you know, I'm sure yourself included, I remember, you know, to your point, shopping the market. Like, if you knew where to go, and draw that inspiration, that really came from your creativity, from your perspective. Like, if you were in New York, not everyone knew about Daffy's or, you know, some of the places that, you know, so as a designer, you know, I think, you know, creating your own sort of, you know, physical mood board, you know, really depended on your own creativity. And I think now everyone's sort of looking through the same lens.
Yeah, they're pulling from the same places.
And even musically, it's like it's the same silo, right? It's like everybody's kind of boxed in, and not, to your point, like you don't see the one guy that was able to travel to Japan and find that wash house and bring it back, and then PRP, you know what I mean? Like, you know, it's like that was the new wave, right? You were like, oh, they killed that. Or what was the newness of this particular brand that you know, inspired us to now say, oh, now that's the next.
Right.
I can't call, I don't know what is next, you know, in that sense. And I think that's one of the things I think the hurt is, that people are rushing to market for, I guess, for clout versus integrity or the depth of what your brand is going to be, from, you know, instant credibility to longevity.
Or chasing trends, because now everyone knows what that trend is, as opposed to, like, I always loved when our designers would come back and it was like, okay, I would wear that. You know what I mean? So it's just like, wow, you know, like, you really saw that creativity shine through.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, I have seen, and I'm sure you can probably speak to this, you know, just from actually developing the product, like I'm sure that, you know, technology has helped, you know, in terms of like everything from your tech packing and everything else.
Sure.
So,
Yeah. In that regards, I think,
Yeah.
you know, like PLM systems and I'm trying to think of another example, but from a development standpoint, I think certainly technology has aided it and aided the development process. But sometimes also that feels like a shortcut, you know what I'm saying? And, you know, in a lot of ways, you know, people, you know, it's inevitable. Evolution is inevitable. We're all headed in the same direction. And we, you know, like every next generation is going to benefit from, you know, things being pushed. But sometimes, or most times, you sort of get to a point where you miss the way things were made, right? Actually made and produced. And I think we're going through that now, right? Like a certain level of construction, a certain understanding of how, you know, clothes are made or cut or washed or, you know, or developed, just a general development idea. I think you can see the brands who are doing it in a more thoughtful, sort of slower throwback way to how product was developed, versus someone that is maybe rushing through it or shortcutting it. So, you know, I think as people are more aware of how things are made, they're also seeing through like, all right, well, this was shortcutted or this was done the proper way. So you kind of have, you know, again, it's like not good or bad. You either live or die by it. You know what I'm saying?
Interesting. So let me ask you this: what have been your wins throughout your career, and then also tell us about some of the L's that were taken alongside.
Yeah, what are the L? Like we went through the bio.
Yeah, we know the wins.
We saw the wins. So what? Well, I mean, not even speaking specifically, but you know, what have you learned from those L's?
And that would help the next generation. Sure.
I mean, tons of L's, but you know, the old sort of sports adage, like you either win or you learn, right? And so the L's don't necessarily mean losses. The L's could be, you know, for learning, right? And so that's how I try to look at it at most times. Certainly, you know, have regretted some decisions or some outcomes, right? But I think the L was it's like constantly evolving. Like it doesn't stay as an L, right? Because you learn so much from that, and hopefully you can learn so much from that, and then turn that into a dub, right? Like so that I don't maybe look at it in that sense of like wins and losses, right? I don't think back on the wins and you know like like keep the banner in the rafters and look up at it and be like, shit. It's all
the intramural. What did LA just hang the intramural banner?
Oh right. The in season tournament banner. Terrible. So so the point is like, yes, everyone takes L's, whether it's like in self defeat or at the hands of another, but hopefully those can all be learn lessons, and that's what I've taken it away from. Like I've been around long enough doing a particular thing to know that it's all gonna come back, right? And it's all gonna cycle around. And so so those L's are really, just learnings for another day.
So wait, how about this? What if I said more specific, right? And just for the education of the young people that are coming up with making a brand. And let's say there's a season, plan out. You want to produce, you want to make everything on that page, right? And your distribution is what it is.
Right.
Have you ever gone into it and said, we might have made too much stuff, we might have manufactured too much, we might have we might have just made just enough to pay for what we made.
Oh yeah.
We didn't,
I mean, you never get it right. You either, this, you never buy it right?
Yeah.
You either buy too much or you buy too little. You never buy just the right amount because, you sell through something, you didn't make enough, right? You sit on inventory, you made too much. So you're never, ever, have it perfectly lined out.
Right.
And so those are, that just comes with the business. I don't, I think that the times where you really get it right is when you put your heart into something that you really believe, and if you're lucky enough that other people can see that passion and they can see the love and they want to buy into it, and it doesn't have to be so transactional. They could just believe in it, right? And so that to me is the ultimate win. And then in contrast to that, the loss is when you feel like the same, like, yo, I put everything into it, or rather you didn't put everything into it, and you maybe try to take a shortcut, and you took something for granted, and you wasted the opportunity to really connect with somebody. That to me is the biggest L, right?
Nice.
Where you and maybe you didn't believe in it as much, or maybe you didn't believe in yourself as much,
or you didn't give it your ALL.
Right, exactly.
What you normally would do in general. I got you. That's good stuff.
Yeah. So we've seen streetwear over the past 2 decades, but more so recently expand far beyond the borders that we existed in, particularly overseas.
Sure.
Being embraced by different countries, cultures.
Yeah.
How do you continue to factor that into your creative process?
I mean, I take it with a grain of salt, right? Like, I know for some people and some brands and some companies or corporations or parts of the industry, like, it's really disposable, right? It's like, cool, this is the hot shit now, and so we'll try and we'll try to suck it up as we'll try and like suck it in as much as we can and spit it back out. And when it falls out of favor or falls out of trend, which eventually it will for the popular culture, then they'll be gone with it, right?
Yeah.
And so you want to see the people from those spaces and those communities who have created what we call streetwear or the culture at large. You want to see those people succeed, but you also know that it's like it's gonna get to a point where people can get chewed up and spit back out, right? And hopefully, you are of sound mind and body and spirit that you can recover from that, or that you have invested all of your love and your energy in this thing that that people look as sort of a transient fad or a style that's in now and then out tomorrow, right? So cautiously, happy to see people from this space like really succeed, but and hopefully like that we get to the point where ones that do really well and the ones that really benefit from it are able to build structures and communities that can be self-sustaining, that don't need it to pop off across the world in every single corner. So that's my thought on it.
And how have you maintained a balance? One thing that I remember, like the later years of being in the business, working with younger designers, and there was always this, for them, sort of an emotional connection to what they were creating. Mm-hmm. And because at that point we were, 12, 15 years in the business, so we were only looking at it from the business perspective. Right. So with you sort of wearing both hats, how do you maintain that balance from, the creative process and being passionate about what you're making and also making those important business decisions?
Shit, I wish I could balance it better. But, as you get older, I think for me, I know the things that I'm good at and I know the things that I'm not good at. And I think just being aware of like knowing what you don't know is probably better than, clearly better than not knowing what you don't know. Right. Yeah. And so I think, like you try and, I try to work into my strengths, and that doesn't mean that I don't try to, be a better business minded, guy. But I think you start to align with things in yourself and then with other people to help bolster that, right? Like that you have hopefully a team of people around you who complement you in good ways. And so it's about making sure that you surround yourself, because no one does it on their own. Certainly I haven't done it on my own. It's always going to be the village that sort of looks after you and takes care of you. And so hopefully you've developed a great circle of people who complement what you do, right? What you do well and what you don't do well. So I like to think that I can lean on, I have leaned on and benefited from a great circle of people and mentors and, people that have paved the way. And so positioning myself to be able to give that back also, you know what I'm saying? So.
Okay. So you mentioned your son earlier. So I think, that gives you kind of a personal connection to the next generation of fashion. So do you like the way the next generation is headed? What are your thoughts on the future of streetwear in particular?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if it's my place to comment on the next generation. I think my responsibility is more to help provide, if I have the opportunity to help provide and some knowledge and experience and pass that on. We've done a ton of mentorship programs and speaking to students and things of that nature, and we really benefited from having mentors really guide us and help point us in the right direction. So we are products of that sort of, each one teach one mentality, right? And so I think my responsibility is more to then give that back and pay that back when I can, right? And it's really more, it's less about making a judgment, and it's more about saying, like, here's the information, here's what we experienced, here's the lessons from our journey, maybe or maybe not even the lessons, but here's been our journey.
Yes.
And you do with that as you would, because I'm not gonna translate from that. You're gonna interpret that the way that you experience the world and see the world. So it's less about, I also hear, musicians sort of answer this question the same way about like an older generation, like, oh, what do you think about the music of today? And that answer of like, maybe it's not my place to really critique what's happening today, because maybe I'm, like so out of touch with sort of what's driving.
But I think you shortchange yourself. The reason I say that is, I mean, most recently, you were just on the runway with your son in a current line from a historical brand, right? LVMH, right? And you look cool to me in the sense that there was no drop off.
Right.
When I saw your son, it was like, oh, who's the old dude with him? Right? It felt good. Right. And so, I think we're blessed to say, hey, our generation and our kids were closer too. Yeah. I mean, we fall under the same umbrella of hip hop. Opinionated, from music and DJ to DJ. Right. The music they're spitting out now might be a little diluted in comparison to what we what we like and where it came from. But nonetheless, the conversations easily had in that, and it constitutes for the the sense of where we came from. Right. It's a closer conversation than with our parents.
Sure, for sure.
And the contributions that you've done, in a sense, I gotta say, I mean, I'm sure anybody who knows Lux, this, that, and the other, you should be the first call up. You should be the first ring, in a sense of what your experience was, and what we're seeing now. Do you see, even being part of that show, what did you even see from that standpoint of this newness? Obviously, Pharrell is of an age, but then he's got these young kids. He's got to relate to all of what's going on. Right. What'd you see from that perspective?
Well, yeah, I mean that like the youth are always going to drive the movement, right? Like that's where the power is. That's where the energy is. And so you have to figure out a way, if you're an older guy, right? Like, not that Pharrell's an older guy, but certainly in the scope of where we are now in fashion, like he's an elder, right? Yeah. And so you're going to have to embrace that youthful energy, that the youth. You're going to have to embrace it, because they're the ones that really, like they have the energy, they have the drive, they care about it. And not to say we don't care about it, but just because we can occupy the same space at the same time. And I'm happy to see the younger generation really making an effort to understand where things came from. And I think that that's super important, right? Like you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you came from, right? And so the effort to sort of like, like I see that as a trend, which is a dope trend to me, right? Really paying homage to the people who paved the way, and like doing the math and going back and seeing, where did this come from?
Like Corey LeRae doing a collab with Busta,
exactly,
taking a sample but then putting them on the remix,
right?
And,
exactly, and there's a lot of that, and so I think that's super dope, and we need each other, right? Like the older generation needs the younger generation to make the shit hot. The younger generation needs the older generation to understand why these decisions were made, as they're going back into the archive and pulling, from the archive to turn it into something new. Like we need each other. Right. So me saying like, it's not my place to judge what's happening nowadays is not to say that I don't I don't have a place, or I can't coexist in a younger space. Right. Certainly, like if you're open-minded enough and you are again surrounded by the right people, that you can be in these spaces, right? Like you can be in the show, and that was a blessing to be able to walk with my son. So both those things can be true, right? Like you can really like be the elder and sit back and observe, not judge, and present your experiences for you to interpret, right? And hopefully they take from that, you know.
Yeah, I always say the wheel doesn't change, just the spokes.
Mm-hmm.
The wheel spins.
Yeah.
You just gotta change the spokes.
It's true.
That's it.
So yeah, that's a good kind of segue into my final question, which is what piece of sage advice would you have for this young up and coming generation of designers that'll be watching this?
You know, just really refine and develop and understand your point of view, right? Like the way that you see things is your superpower. It's the single most important thing that's going to separate you from anyone that's doing the same thing or in the same space. Like really pay attention to how you see things and how that's different from how other people see things, and embrace that, right? Like nurture it, develop it, and protect it. And, you know, it's easy to tell someone and like, you know, like be confident and believe in yourself. You know, like I my youngest son, I'm always telling him that, right? Like the most important thing that you will need in this world is your confidence, right?
Yeah.
And so it's easy to say that, but it's like, well, how do I get my confidence, right?
Yeah.
And you have to practice it, and you have to be aware of what it is that you are doing, right? And aware of your energy, aware of how you treat other people, aware how you treat yourself, and continue to hone in on it and protect it. And that's the practice. And then that's how you get to the confidence, right? And then that's how you really start to build a foundation in which you can develop your point of view.
Nice, man.
So you really need to invest in yourself, and you need to be aware of the things that you do differently in the world, the way that you see the world differently, and you got to nurture that, and you got to, you know, like be really proud of that, right? Of your differences, because that's what's going to separate you from the rest of the world, from the rest of the pie.
Great advice. And I recently told someone, regardless of how you feel on the Kanye spectrum, but what I told him that I always appreciated was like his confidence, to your point, is definitely his superpower. Yeah. You know, whether you're faking it till you make it, like I still see him as the ultimate example of, like letting your confidence, like that's your fuel, and that certainly, what pushes you through. Sure. So I thank you for your wise words, and we thank you for your time. We are always proud of you, my brother. Going to continue to cheerlead for you.
Thank you.
And we appreciate your words of wisdom here today.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Thank you to you both for paving the way. And continuing to be, great examples, and forging into new spaces. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.